Hello and welcome to a Faces of the MRM interview. We are with a good friend of mine, Dean Hedges. As you can see, I just found out you live on an island.
Yeah, yeah, I'm on San Juan Island, which is in Washington State. I've actually lived on islands like my whole life. I spent 30 years in the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean and was born on Long Island in New York.
And you say that you can see Canada from your house?
From the top, yeah, I can
So,
see over to Victoria.
so I'm guessing in the winter you're covered with snow.
No, usually every winter there'd be maybe 3 or 4 days of snow cover out of the whole year.
I don't know what about it. It's so cool, but just the idea of being on an island just completely covered in snow is just so awesome.
Yeah, it's well the best weather on the entire West Coast is on Salt Spring Island, which is only a stone's throw away from here. So what happens is Vancouver Island kind of blocks the hard weather, and so we end up with pretty pleasant or pretty not unpleasant winters.
And see, I don't mind cold in the winter. We never really get cold down here. We're lucky if we get, a couple days in the 30s, if that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you may have. I remember a few years ago there was a frost that took away a bunch of I don't know. I guess it was oranges in Florida.
so we met in the National Coalition for Men,
Correct.
and we are both MRAs, aka men's rights activists.
I would say so.
So we were talking earlier. Some of the things you wanted to discuss is really just kind of, what the men's rights movement means to you and what the men's rights movement doesn't mean to you. And this is something we both feel strongly about. The men's rights movement is not, to react to this sentence, the men's rights movement is not anti-woman.
Correct. In fact, it's actually quite pro women. I mean, there are some manifestations in the men's rights movement where you've got some guys that are just hurt and bitter and vent. But generally, the message is trying to unify these differences and get back to playing, you know, pleasantly in the sandbox. The men's rights advocates are for creating the most healthy relationships that we can. Uh, that means removing obstacles and biases so that good, healthy, and productive relationships can flourish. Um, I I consider myself a men's rights advocate, but actually more really an anti-feminist, and that draws a lot of criticism because anti-feminism is often associated and conflated with anti-womanist thinking. And really, it's the opposite. I would suggest that an anti-feminist is more like a dentist, who loves teeth, but in that loving will drill out, the bad spots. Or imagine, walking with someone that you love and seeing, some dog poop in their way and pointing it out so they don't step in it. This is what anti-feminists do. I often suggest that it's a lot like we're people with flashlights coming to the rescue of people who believe there are monsters under the bed. And it's fascinating in a disappointing way that a lot of the people who have monsters under their beds don't want men with flashlights. Uh, all of the research that I've done, and it's not complete, but I do as much as I can, and it's all good news. Like all of the horrors and misfortunes that feminists, you know, decree unstoppingly are not accurate, and the news is actually no, they're far less the victim, they are far less injured, they're far less oppressed than they think or that we thought. And this is great news. Everywhere I look, I cannot find a real undebunkable example where there's been an oppressive patriarchy. In fact, I had GoFundMe campaign a couple of years ago offering $500. I would donate, and it's still going on. I donate $500 if anybody can just bring me one real example of oppressive patriarchy where men are oppressing women and that men benefit from that oppression without providing reasonable compensation at men's peril and expense. And no one's been able to do it. I even presented this to Gloria Steinem after talking to her when she came and did a speech in Bellingham. And she said, well, what about the wage gap? And I said, well, that wage gap, if it was really there, but that means that men are paying more taxes than women if men are making more money. And a lot of that tax money goes to supporting women's programs in offices in the federal and state governments. So it's not, even if there was a wage gap, which one could argue there isn't, it's still not a real example of oppression.
And I would add to
oppression,
that. I always say when feminists talk about the wage gap, well, what about the workplace mortality gap?
Exactly.
Men are,
exactly.
if you look at, depending on the study you use, 15 to 20 times more likely to die at work. So men do the jobs that kill you, that society depends upon.
Yeah. And 3/4 of the injuries. And it's if you argued that, well, it's because men aren't allowing women to take these dangerous jobs, okay, that could be so, that they could say that, I get a lot of feminists saying, well, women have traditionally been treated like property. And I can't really tell if that's so because I've only lived my life. I don't know what's gone in the past. History is subjective at best. But there's every indication. I mean, look at there was one guy back in the Jamestown settlement days in the beginnings of the European invasion into America. One guy, the women were not allowed to sail across the Atlantic and be part of this settlement. And one guy says, well, we're going to get some women over there. And he got some women who wanted to go and got him on the boat, and he got caught. And just for exposing these women to the possibility of distress and harm, he was publicly hanged. So I can't really see that. If that's an oppressive patriarchy, we're going to have to do a whole lot better. But when I argue, I look at, I love reasonable, rational thinking. I have a romantic attachment to it. And I think that the truth is all the facts and all the factors. And there are so many that it would take more than a lifetime to collect enough, to have some idea of what the truth is. But the more you collect of both facts and factors, the better and clearer the picture is going to be. And, you look at evolution, and I often use evolution as an argument against the idea of this oppressive patriarchy, because you have, men have lower tone voices, women have higher tone voices. This is a behavioral and biological evolutionary characteristic. So there's got to be a reasonable explanation for it. Like, what's the benefit? Well, men are really, their lower voices are really good at scaring away predators. And women's higher pitched voices are really good for pulling and eliciting men's protective instincts, because women's voices sound more like child's voices. And everyone is designed to protect and provide for their young, or anyone's young. But this is what has elevated and propelled the human above all the other species, if you want to call it above, and that is the tremendous resource and responsibility that we give to our offspring. We have, there isn't another animal on the planet that takes care of their little ones for 18 or 20 years and beyond, in terms of providing social services. But this has allowed us over the generations to, it's required the males and the female humans to adapt particular roles in the culture and in the society. And that's developed into, a history of expressions like, women and children first. That's a valuable thing. I mean, if we didn't have that, our success rate on the planet would be considerably less. You look at eyesight, right? Women have better eyesight at color differentiation, and men have better eyesight at perspective, distances, and seeing moving objects across a non-moving background. This is a biological evolutionary adaptation. And my guess, I could be wrong, of course, but it seems to me that if you're picking berries, you're going to get really good at determining which ones are ripe and which ones aren't ripe by the very, very fine changes in the color. And that's where women's color eyesight has increased, and men's have increased by scanning the horizon for predators, whether human or animal, so that the berries can be picked in safety, and then everybody gets berries because the berry pickers didn't get eaten by bears. So we work together historically the best. And as far as I'm concerned, the men's rights movement that's the goal, is to make this relationship between the boys and the girls, between the men and the women, between the ladies and the gentlemen, as productive and as pleasant as possible. And the problem I see with feminism is that it creates a hostile environment for that. Feminist point of view tends to paint men as bad guys. And certainly there are lots of bad men. And the thing is, when you study bad behavior, it's almost never a creative effort. It's always some injured person, injured little boy that didn't get the love and attention from his mom and dad, who becomes an Adolf Hitler or a Mussolini or whatever, or a Parkland shooter. The potential for men to be wonderful is every bit there, and the potential for men to be horrible is there too. So it may well be that men need a little bit more nurturing at the beginnings of their lives, which has become less and less with the feminist influence. Feminism tends to.
So I was saying a lot to unwrap with that. So where will I start? So I'll start off by saying, when you say that the goal of the men's rights movement is to make things better between men and women, something I want to make clear is that MRAs do not think that we should be restricted to rigid gender roles. So we're not saying that women and men should be forced to do this or not allowed to do that. I just don't want, because if people watch this, they may try and spin what you were saying, and that's not what you were saying, and that's not what we think. So it's not like we think the women's place is at home and the men's place is at work. We believe in equality.
Right. We belong side by side.
Exactly. Just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is some value in traditionalist thinking, but traditionalist thinking in modern times is going to be out of place. There is evolution occurring, and as we adapt to that, we're going to be better off.
In terms of when you said that, when you look at evil men, you can look back in their childhood and see that there was some kind of neglect or some kind of trauma there.
Almost always.
I think that's sometimes true, but it's not quite always true. I do think there is such thing as true evil.
Yeah.
I mean,
certainly.
There are some people you read about their life and you read about their childhood, and it was fairly normal, and yet they still grew up to be these, horrible people. But to that point,
I think Jeffrey Dahmer was like that. Didn't he have like a mom and dad that was still together and stuff?
I'm not sure, to be honest. It wouldn't surprise me.
But it's rare. It's rarer, and fortunately so. So I was going to say, to that end, we supporting men in men's issues, men's hurdles and travails, that's going to help women. The better adjusted a man is, the better he's going to be to the women around him. So anti-feminism, not only is it not against women, but it's actually for women. It will improve their experience with men.
That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
What anti-feminism means is not that we are against the principles of equality and women's rights. And you come on this more strongly than I do. I'm always careful about the anti-feminist label.
Mm.
What I say is this: you can browse my channel, right? Search feminism in my channel and see all the videos that I have where I criticize specific feminist individuals and specific feminist organizations for the
Right.
specific words and actions that they've done. So I don't say that I'm an anti-feminist, period. What I say is the reality is these are the organizations that are campaigning for laws that discriminate against men. And they're always
Exactly
feminist
so.
organizations.
Yeah,
So
perhaps more accurately, we're more like anti-misandrists. Like we'd like to eliminate or minimize the discrimination against men, and not just for personal reasons. You know, obviously, I would. It'd be nice if I wasn't called an incel 45 times a week, but uh, you know, that as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can tell, you know, and again, the research isn't finished, but the health of a heterosexual relationship is essential for the health of a community and the health of the society. And it doesn't matter if it's human or dogs or cats or fish or, well, maybe fish, I don't know. But, and this isn't, I'm not trying to disqualify other types of relationships, but that unique quality that heterosexuals have, you know, in the reproductive thing is, it should give them special consideration, or us, you know, whatever. But, you know, the bottom line is you're going to end up with a whole lot more happiness, a whole lot less misery, with with one simple little thing, and that is appreciation. You know, I don't know about equality. I'm not set on it yet because I don't see gender equality in any other animal on the planet. The males have to be sacrificial to the females because of the burden of reproductive responsibility. Okay, I can accept that. But we have to appreciate the sacrifices that men experience for that. And the sacrifices are enormous. You know, I started looking up stuff like twice as many men are, and then I'd fill it in. And there's like twice as many men die of stomach cancer, twice as many as men die of so many things. We're far more likely to be hit by lightning. We're far more likely to drown. You know, almost 10 times more likely to be killed by a fellow man.
why are we more likely to be killed by lightning? That's interesting.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the workplace. You know, if you're out there in the field and or I guess, you know, you're playing golf, I don't know. But
Well,
I remember,
I'm thinking the guys, you see the videos, the guys who climb telephone poles.
yeah,
I would
you know,
never
did you see
do
that? Did you see that video? It was in Japan, and it was in a shipyard, and they were moving a great big boat carrier thing. You know, it was like 8 guys moving this giant cart, and it touched a power line, and all of those guys fried. And I'm not talking about being killed by electricity. They were cooked to a crisp, and you can see it on the video, and it's just, oh, you know. But this is what men are exposed to, and right or wrong, it's what it is. And you know, in men's hearts have more stress chemical absorbing cells in their hearts, and it's not because men's hearts are bigger. They have more of those cells in them, and that's a biological evolutionary change that must be associated with a higher degree of stress in their lives. I mean, certainly the suicide rate is, you know, generally speaking, people don't kill themselves as a creative effort. I mean, maybe you know, a Buddhist monk might have immolated himself in an effort to, you know, for world peace, but that's not so common. I mean, I was almost murdered actually, by somebody I was living with who attempted to make it look like I had killed myself.
that.
And
Jeez.
a little bell went off in my head, you know, and the police showed up, and I'm like, hey, you know, I'm not going back to sleep. I'm out of here. And I left and I didn't go back.
What happened? I mean, if you can talk, I mean, can you talk about it?
Oh yeah, of course. This
What
was in
happened?
2000. It was in 2000. I was in St. Croix, and the woman, I was taking care of a house, and the woman that was living in the house, it wasn't her house. Um, she had called the police in the middle of the night and told them that I was suicidal. And the police came to the house. They woke me up and asked, Mr. Hedges, are you suicidal? And I said, well, I don't know. I was asleep. I don't think so, because I think if I was suicidal, I wouldn't be able to sleep. And something just clicked in my head, and I'm like, this woman is trying to kill me and make it look like suicide. So this was her pre-planning. So I think her thinking was that, the police would leave, I'd go back to sleep, and then she would shoot me with her gun, make it look like suicide, and then she could go, oh, see, he was suicidal. The reason why this seems so likely is because if you research that woman, whose name is Louise Satriano, she has a history of psychotropic events. Um, she was an undercover police officer in Chicago, involved in like sting operations. I don't know if you remember, like it was like in the mid 80s. There was a whole bunch of gynecologists, male gynecologists, that were getting in trouble for supposedly taking liberties with their clients. Well, this house on St. Croix was owned by a gynecologist, only nobody knew where he was. Nobody could find him. The house had 7 years of back taxes due. I mean, there's just so many little, and this, I mean, it's funny now because I lived through it, right? But this woman called up my landlord when I moved out of that house. She called up my landlord at 2 o'clock in the morning and told them that I had killed her dog and was trying to sell the meat, the dog meat, for the money that she owed me. She owed me some money for some work I did on the house that was above and beyond, the regular stuff. She called me up many times in the middle of the night, saying stuff like, "Where's my dog?" And the dogs were fine. And now, the weirdest thing too is, like, I mean, I know this is off on a tangent, but she was convinced that these dogs were a unique breed, that there were no other two dogs like this on the planet, in the world. Well, they're corgis. Like, yeah, it's a breed of dog. There's thousands of them.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she ended up, she sued the Chicago Police Department because she couldn't make the grade. So she sued them for sex discrimination. They couldn't give her like a beat job, so they gave her this detective job. She ended up being fired or quitting for psychiatric reasons. She was supposed to have handed in her firearm, and that was the very firearm that I believe she was going to try to kill me with. The other
And you
thing is
lived
too,
with this person?
yeah, I
Oh
was
my.
hired to take care of the house while she was away, which I did. She came back and wanted me to continue managing that. The house was a $5 million beautiful beachfront house on the South Shore of St. Croix. But she
So
had
this wasn't a relationship. This was you were working for,
working. Yeah,
but you stayed
yeah,
in that, you slept in that house
yeah,
in a different room.
yeah. Yes, in a different room.
Okay.
In fact, for a while, I was even in a different building. I was living in like the gardener's house, I guess it would be. But
And so just so because I'm still taking in everything
isn't it?
you just said.
Yeah.
So she called the police and she
Uh-huh.
told them that you had said you were feeling suicidal.
Well, I don't know what she told the police, but that was what the police told me, was that she had called because I was suicidal.
Oh my God.
But
And
I was sound. I wasn't suicidal, but I was sound asleep. And not only that, but when I had gone to sleep, I had left my door open. For this is the Caribbean, right? So you want some airflow. It's hot, even in the night. But the police knocked on my door. So the door was closed when the police arrived. So she must have closed the door and then called the police. And the police came out thinking, oh my God, here's a suicidal man with a gun. And and the other thing that's really weird about it is she made a point of telling me she had the gun which I thought was kind of weird because, like, it's something she's not supposed to have, although I didn't know that at the time. She was supposed to have handed in. That was her service revolver. But when I went back with the marshal, with the court's marshal to retrieve the rest of my personal belongings, she wouldn't answer the door. And when the marshal and I walked around the house, we looked into the window and we saw her with her gun like this. Even after the marshal had knocked on her door, announced himself as, "Hey, I'm the marshal here with Mr. Hedges. We're here to collect the rest of his things." So she was, you know, uh, unstable, to be the most polite.
This interview is taking such a wild turn. So, okay,
Oh, there's
what are the fire marshals? So the fire marshal sees her holding the gun like this. What happens?
yeah, not fire marshal, just the courts, the marshal for the court.
Marshal for the court. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, he saw the gun, I saw the gun, and he was like, let's do this another time.
Jeez.
I'm like, yeah, fine with me. So
wow.
we both left. He called her on the phone and said, we're going to come over. You can't brandish your firearm. And so I was able to get the rest of my stuff out. But yeah, she did some wacky things, like you hear the bells go off in your head. You don't really know that's what it is until later.
I think 100% you escaped being murdered that night. And
I nearly got hit by lightning once. I've been in a couple of hurricanes. Never was my body afraid before my mind was. And in that situation, every hair in my body stood on end and said, you got to get out of here. Like this is a dangerous place. It was like an earthquake. I mean, yeah. So, whatever guardian angel I might happen to have was on duty that night.
Jeez, this is becoming crazy stories with Dean Hedges.
Yeah. I mean, I say it with joy, and happiness because I lived through it. I got bragging rights, I suppose. But yeah. I mean, if you Googled her, you'd see there's other, she had some other weird thing happen where her husband and her boyfriend were both Chicago police officers, and somehow or another they killed each other at the same time. Like, yeah.
But did they say it was like a suicide pact or like a dual murder or what?
Well, um, just from what I read off of the internet, which is available, to peruse, it appears as though these two got into an argument in a parking garage. It's the husband and the boyfriend, so one could see there could be some tension between them, and somehow or another they both ended up dead. So was she there too and killed them both? I have no way of knowing. But she might have put these two against each other. And, the other thing too is, corrupt police persons tend to kill themselves before the truth comes out. So there may have been a whole bunch of who knows what's going on with the three of them. But considering that she was put in a position to act as a gynecologist patient to try to flush out a gynecologist who was taking liberties, and then somehow being in the house, no rent, she's not paying rent, she's not leasing the thing, of a fabulous beachfront house with a swimming pool and palm trees and all that. And it was owned by a gynecologist that nobody knew where he was. And I had contacted the ex-wife because I was trying to get paid, for this work that I had done. And she was like, well, I don't know where my ex-husband is. And, and I don't owe you the money. And I mean, just, yeah, a lot of things just weren't really adding up until it started to add up.
Wow.
But, well, that's just one. I mean, that would certainly inspire somebody to maybe become a men's rights advocate. But it does. I would like to find out. I'd like to study on all of this violence that men perp on each other. You know, how much of that is inspired or created by women? You know, you look at the John Mast situation where his father-in-law shot him dead because John Mast's ex-wife, or this man's daughter, had made up false accusations of abuse of his children, and he had just gotten court-ordered visitation to see his kids, and he went to go pick up his kids, and the kids weren't there, but his ex-wife's father was there and shot him dead.
We
So,
did
you
it.
know,
We did a conversation about this on the Discord server, and I'm kind of sorry to rush, but we have 6 minutes 30 seconds
right.
left.
Oh, there's so much. We'll have to do another one.
But yeah,
But the,
I mean, I got to hear more. You say that's just the beginning of the stories. We got to hear more.
yeah,
But we did a video. We did an episode on this on the Discord server about proxy violence, and
yeah,
Ma went through not. It wasn't accusations of child abuse, but it was a false accusation by a group of women, and that inspired a gaggle of men to
yeah,
threaten him.
right. I mean, look at Emmett
And
Till. I had a situation like that where I remember I was breaking up with an ex-girlfriend, and it was very difficult because, you know, I don't like to break up. And I had called her, and she was like, "Well, I'm at McCormick and Schmidt." So that made me think she was alone. McCormick and Schmidt is a restaurant bar in Seattle on the west side of Lake Union. So I went there thinking she was there, and she was, but so was the guy she had traded me for. So, you know, all of a sudden there was this, you know, fantastically hostile situation where this guy, you know, he was drunk and he wanted to fight with me. And, you know, I came so close to fighting this guy. You know, I had in my mind, I had exactly lined up target and process, you know, exactly what to do and in what order. And, you know, I just set in my mind, I'm just like, I'm not going to let Liz trick me into harming another guy, even though the guy was you know, he didn't treat me very well at all. He was pretty much an asshole. But that would have been, you know, there would have been a case where, you know, he would have been injured, or we both would have been injured for what? You know, fighting over a girl. Yeah, that's fun on TV, but in real life, we shouldn't be doing that.
yeah, there's that video from LA. It was like 2, 3 years ago. I think it was Venice by the beach. The woman
Right.
who walked past these two guys who were just drinking coffee or whatever it was, and she poured her drink over them, and they got up and they ran to her husband and punched him in the face. So this man who had done nothing, who
Right.
wasn't at all involved in the situation, who didn't antagonize it, wasn't the one to pour the drink, all of a
Yeah.
sudden now he has a facial injury because
Yeah.
of something that had nothing to do with him.
Well, what do they call it? Hypo agency of women. You know, like they're not held as responsible for their actions as men are, and men are often held responsible for the women's actions. You know, it's not quite right unless there's reasonable compensation in the form of appreciation. Um, you know, it's you know, our behavior is not unique. I mean, we are we're like the onion skin of hundreds of men and women that came before us. I mean, these aren't my fingers. I didn't make them. They were gifted to me. I mean, think about it. The ovum that I was created from was there when my mother was born. So in a sense, you know, like in a spiritual sense, if you wanted to look at it, you know, I've been around for a lot longer than the 62 years that I know of, somehow or another. I mean, I don't know, but you know, and this is one of the arguments that I give to feminists, is that we're the living proof that there couldn't be an oppressive patriarchy, and if there was, then evolution decided that that was the best way to be, because that's going to give us the most chances of success. So, you know, like I just can't find an example of oppressive patriarchy that I can say, yeah, this is it. I mean, there might be some that are kind of minor, but certainly nothing that would, cause all mankind to go, hey, my mistake.
Because you're conditioned for oppressive patriarchy. You said you can't find an example of an oppressive patriarchy in which men get no benefit.
Right. Yeah,
Or
because
purely, sorry, you can't find an example where women are oppressed solely to the benefit of men.
right. Oppression has certain qualifications. All right. Like 10-year-olds are not considered oppressed because we don't give them driver's licenses. And the reason why is because parents are generally held responsible for driving the kids where they need to go or where they need to be. So they have drivers provided for them. So they're not being oppressed by not having driver's licenses. So in terms of women being oppressed in a net sense, in a gross sense, might be able to say, well, women weren't allowed to have bank accounts. I don't know if that's actually true, but the compensation is that men, their husbands generally, or their fathers, were responsible for financial pitfalls that the woman or the girl may have incurred. So that's not oppression. If you couldn't get a credit card without a cosigner in 1963, that's not oppression because you had a cosigner, which was somebody who would take the burden of the responsibility off of you. So that's a reasonable compensation. I can't call that oppression. It's a more defined social structure or gender role than maybe we're comfortable with now, but it just doesn't meet the grade of oppression. Oppression,
Well,
you've got to, you really have to harm somebody.
We are pretty much out of time. It's going to shut off any moment now. But I gotta say, I gotta ask you about the hurricane. What were the two hurricanes you were in?
Hurricane Marilyn in 1995, I think it was. Hurricane Hugo in 1989.
Oh, Hugo was a big one.
Well, so was Lewis. They're